Many of you from the Java or C# background are familiar with the concept of overloading program units. Overloading helps us build a friendly suite of APIs with the same name. Based on the context of data passed into them, the runtime engine invokes the correct implementation. This makes it easy for the consuming clients to call these subprograms. Oracle allows overloading of subprograms as long as the parameters differ in order, or the number of parameters are different, or the name of parameters are different, or the data type family of parameters are different. You can create overloaded subprograms only as a part of a package or a local subprogram. You cannot overload standalone procedures and functions, and trying to do so will only overwrite the previous implementation with the same name. Here is an example of overloading local subprograms. Inside the main procedure update DPT, we have defined two local subprograms with the same name display message. One takes in two parameters, pLocation of type varchar2 and pMessage of type varchar2, both in the in mode. The other subprogram takes in only one parameter, pMessage of type varchar2 in the in mode. Later in the execution section, when display message is called with two varchar2 parameters, before updating an input employee ID concatenated with PEMPID, the first implementation is invoked. Later towards the end, when display message is called with just one varchar2 parameter finished successfully, the second implementation is called. Here is an example of overloading package subprograms. So here in the HR management package specification, we have defined function calcBonus with three overloaded definitions. The first taking pProfit number type and pDPTID number type. The second taking pProfit number type and pDPT name of type varchar2. And the third prec, a record type. It is of type grec declared earlier in the specification. So here, based on the number and data type of parameters, the runtime can call the appropriate implementation. Here is the package body implementation. We are just showing the relevant section of the package body to show the function implementations. The first function takes in pProfit and pDPTID and calls setBonus and returns getBonus passing appropriate parameters. The second implementation taking in pProfit number type and pDPT name varchar2 type declares LDPTID of type departments.dptid %type. It opens a cursor to fetch the department ID for the input department name and then calls the first implementation with the two number input types and returns the result from it. The third one takes in a record parameter type and calls the second implementation, passing in the appropriate record fields for the pProfit and pDepartment name. The runtime will automatically resolve it to the second implementation and return its result. So here we see how to use records as parameters and procedures, as well as how overloading helps us reuse and extend the implementations, coding only what is different, and reusing the core logic of the first calcBonus implementation. Let us talk about the rules for overloading. You can overload subprograms if the data type family is different. A data type family is the data type and its subtypes. For example, here is a package inside which we have defined update EMP with two parameters, PEMPID of type number and pDPT name of type varchar2. You can overload it by creating another procedure, update EMP, which takes in PEMPID of type binary integer and pDPT name of type varchar2. Here the second parameter is the same, but since the data type is number for the first procedure and binary integer for the second, and even though both are numeric, they belong to different data type families and so can be overloaded. In the third implementation, the first parameter is the same, but the second parameter is a number. So the first parameter of type binary integer and the second parameter of type number is different from the previous two implementations, and so this overload is also valid. The next implementation is exactly the same as the second one, and the compiler will catch it and give you an error PLS00307, too many declarations of update EMP match this call. In this case, the compiler catches the error during compilation. In some cases, the code will get compiled, but you will get runtime errors later on. The next implementation keeps the first data type the same, but for the second one makes it a char. This is not valid as it matches the second implementation where the second parameter is varchar2, and you cannot overload varchar2 and char. The last implementation puts the first data type as integer, which is a subtype of number, and the second type as varchar2. This is invalid as it conflicts with the first implementation as number and integer both belong to the same data type family. You can also overload if the order of the parameters is different. Here, even though there are two parameters of type number and varchar2, this overload is valid as the order is swapped in the two implementations. If you have the same number, type, and mode of parameters, but if one is a procedure and the second is a function, then you can still overload them. You can also overload if everything else being the same, the parameter name is different. Here, both the update EMP procedures contain two parameters, the first being a number and the second a varchar2, but you can still overload them as the second parameter is named differently for the two of them. However, for the runtime engine to understand which one you intend to invoke, you need to use named notation in this case. For instance, the invocation passing PEMPID1 and PDPTNameIT will match to the first implementation. If positional notation is used, the runtime engine cannot determine which one we intend to call and will give a runtime error of too many declarations match this call. You cannot overload if only the mode of the parameters is different. For example, here both update EMP procedures take PMPID of type number, but the first one is in the in mode and the second one is in the out mode. Oracle will give you a runtime error in this case. Let us analyze what happens when default values come into play. You can overload two procedures as shown here, where the first parameter of PEMPID of type number is common to both. The first procedure has an additional parameter PDPTName with the default value. So if you are planning to pass only the first parameter and use the default value for the second, we have to use named notation. Calling it with PEMPID with a value of 1 will resolve to the first procedure. But if you pass it with positional notation, then again Oracle has no way of figuring out which one you are trying to call and will give you a runtime error of too many declarations match this call.